stroke. One stroke.
Oh, really?
She wasn't.
1. The Yuletide Invitation. Snow fell softly over the rolling hills of Wiltshire as the grand estate of Winterbourne Manor prepared for its annual Christmas Eve gathering. The house, a sprawling Elizabethan masterpiece of red brick and ivy-clad walls, stood proudly against the white landscape, its chimneys already puffing plumes of smoke into the crisp December air. Inside, servants bustled through the corridors, hanging garlands of holly and mistletoe, polishing silver candelabras, and arranging evergreen boughs along the grand staircase. The scent of pine, cinnamon, and roasting chestnuts filled every room, promising a night of warmth and festivity. Sir Reginald Hargrove, the master of Winterbourne, surveyed the great hall with satisfaction. At 65, he was a robust figure with a mane of silver hair, a neatly trimmed beard, and eyes that sparkled with the authority of old money. The Hargroves had owned this land for centuries, and Sir Reginald took pride in upholding tradition. This year's Christmas Eve party was to be the grandest yet, a reunion of family, old friends, and a few carefully chosen guests who might prove useful to his latest business ventures. "Everything must be perfect," he instructed Mrs. Bellamy, the stern housekeeper who had served the family for 30 years. "The mulled wine especially. I've brought in that special recipe from Germany, cloves, star anise, a touch of orange peel. It will be the highlight of the toast." Mrs. Bellamy nodded briskly. "Yes, sir. The kitchens are preparing it now. Cook has set aside the finest crystal goblets for the midnight toast." Sir Reginald allowed himself a small smile. The toast was sacred in the Hargrove household, a moment when all guests raised their glasses to absent friends, to family, and to the future. This year, the future felt particularly bright. His shipping company had weathered the post-war storms and was now poised for expansion into new markets. There were deals to be sealed, alliances to be strengthened. The first guests began to arrive in the late afternoon, their motor cars crunching over the freshly fallen snow. Lady Eleanor Hargrove, Sir Reginald's younger sister, swept in from London wrapped in sable furs. At 58, she was elegant and sharp-tongued, her dark hair streaked with silver and pinned beneath a fashionable hat. "Reginald, darling," she said, kissing the air near his cheek, "the house looks divine. Though I do hope you've warned the staff about my delicate constitution. I cannot abide draughts." Sir Reginald chuckled. "Eleanor, you've survived worse than a country draught. Come, let me show you to your room." Next came Captain Marcus Trevelyan, a decorated war hero and Sir Reginald's godson. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a neatly trimmed moustache and an easy smile, Marcus had returned from India only months earlier. He carried a bottle of fine Scotch as a gift and clapped Sir Reginald heartily on the back. "Uncle Reggie, still ruling the roost, I see. I've brought something to warm us all later." Sir Reginald laughed. "We'll save it for after the mulled wine toast, my boy. Tradition first." With Marcus came his fiancée, Miss Clarissa Wainwright, a bright-eyed young woman of 25, with golden curls and a laugh that rang like bells. She was the daughter of a wealthy industrialist from Manchester, and the engagement had been announced only that autumn. Clarissa clung to Marcus's arm, gazing wide-eyed at the grandeur of Winterbourne. "It's like a fairy tale," she whispered. "I've never seen anything so beautiful." The arrivals continued. Dr. Felix Armitage, the family physician and an old university friend of Sir Reginald's, arrived with his wife Beatrice, a quiet woman who preferred books to conversation. Then came Mr. Victor Langford, a shrewd businessman from the city whose investments Sir Reginald was courting. Langford was accompanied by his secretary, Miss Daphne Rowe, a strikingly beautiful woman in her late 20s with raven hair and cool green eyes. She moved with quiet efficiency, taking notes even as she smiled politely at introductions. Finally, just as dusk settled and the first lamps were lit, a sleek black Bentley pulled up the drive. Out stepped Mr. Ambrose Harrington, Sir Reginald's nephew and heir presumptive. At 38, Ambrose was handsome in a dissipated way, pale skin, dark circles under his eyes, and a perpetual air of boredom. He had spent much of the past decade drifting between London clubs and continental casinos, living on the allowance his uncle provided. "Uncle?" Ambrose drawled, handing his coat to a footman, summoned to the family fold at last. How touching! Sir Reginald's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Ambrose, I'm glad you could join us. There are matters we should discuss." Ambrose raised an eyebrow. "Business on Christmas Eve? How very modern of you." The last guest to arrive was unexpected, though not entirely unwelcome. As the clock struck 6, a small, dapper figure emerged from a taxi that had struggled up the snowy drive. He wore a heavy overcoat, a fur hat, and carried a neatly furled umbrella despite the weather. His moustache was impeccably waxed, his shoes shone even in the lamplight, and his green eyes twinkled with alert intelligence. "Hercule Poirot, at your service," he announced to the astonished footman who opened the door. "I'm invited, by Sir Reginald himself." Sir Reginald, summoned from the drawing-room, greeted the famous Belgian detective with genuine pleasure. They had met years earlier during a troublesome affair on the Riviera, and Poirot had proven both discreet and brilliant. "My dear Poirot, I sent the invitation on a whim, never dreaming you would accept. You are most welcome." Poirot removed his hat and bowed slightly. "The English Christmas, it fascinates me, and your reputation for hospitality, mon ami, precedes you. I could not resist." As the guests gathered in the great hall for pre-dinner drinks, the atmosphere was one of cheerful anticipation. Fires crackled in enormous hearths. A string quartet played softly in the gallery above. Servants circulated with trays of sherry and canapes. Laughter and conversation filled the air. Yet beneath the surface, small tensions simmered. Lady Eleanor watched Ambrose with thinly veiled disapproval. Clarissa clung a little too tightly to Marcus's arm whenever Daphne Rowe passed nearby. Victor Langford spoke earnestly with Sir Reginald about shares and dividends, while Dr. Armitage listened with a thoughtful frown. And Poirot observed everything, his small grey cells already turning, though no crime had yet been committed. Dinner was announced at 8. The long mahogany table in the dining hall gleamed under candlelight, set with damask linen, antique silver, and crystal that caught the flames like stars. Sir Reginald took his place at the head, Lady Eleanor at the foot. Poirot was seated to Sir Reginald's right, an honour that caused a ripple of interest among the guests. The meal was exquisite: oyster soup, roast goose with sage stuffing, plum pudding flamed with brandy. Wines flowed freely. Conversation grew merrier. By the time the cheese board arrived, the party was in high spirits. As midnight approached, Sir Reginald rose and clapped for attention. "My friends," he said, his voice carrying easily through the room, "it is time for our traditional toast. The mulled wine has been prepared with special care. Let us take our glasses to the great hall, where the Yule log burns, and drink to health, to happiness, and to the future." Servants appeared bearing silver trays laden with steaming crystal goblets, filled with deep red liquid, fragrant with spices. Each guest took one. Sir Reginald raised his high. "To absent friends," he began, the familiar words echoing tradition. "To absent friends," the company replied. "And to those present," Sir Reginald continued, "to those present. And to the future, to the future." The goblets were raised to lips. The warm, spiced wine touched tongues. Laughter rang out anew. No one yet noticed that one goblet, Sir Reginald's own, had been placed just slightly apart from the others on the tray. No one saw the faint, almost imperceptible film that clung to its rim. No one, that is, except Hercule Poirot, whose sharp eyes had caught the anomaly even as he lifted his own glass. But for now, the night was young, the fire bright, and the tragedy still minutes away. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Winter Hall. The great hall of Winterbourne Manor glowed with the warmth of the massive Yule log blazing in the hearth. Flames danced across the ancient stone, casting long shadows that flickered over suits of armour and faded tapestries depicting long-forgotten hunts. The midnight toast had been drunk, the spiced aroma of mulled wine still lingering in the air. Guests mingled in small groups, their voices a gentle hum beneath the soft strains of the string quartet, playing carols from the gallery above. Hercule Poirot stood a little apart, near one of the tall, mullioned windows that looked out onto the snow-covered gardens. He sipped his mulled wine slowly, savouring the rich blend of cloves and cinnamon, while his keen eyes moved from face to face. Something, he felt, was not quite right. The atmosphere was festive, yes, but there were currents beneath the surface, currents of unease, of old resentments, of secrets carefully guarded. Sir Reginald Hargrove was at the centre of the largest group, his laughter booming as he recounted a story from his younger days in the merchant navy. Victor Langford listened intently, nodding at all the right moments, his sharp businessman's mind clearly calculating how best to turn the conversation toward investment opportunities. Beside them, Dr. Felix Armitage stood quietly, a glass of whisky in hand. Poirot noted that the doctor had politely refused the mulled wine, claiming a sensitive stomach. Across the room, Lady Eleanor Hargrove held court with Beatrice Armitage and Clarissa Wainwright. Eleanor's voice carried just enough to be heard over the music. "My dear Clarissa," she was saying, "you must tell me how you snared our dear Marcus. He's been the most elusive bachelor in 3 counties. Clarissa blushed prettily, glancing toward her fiancé, who was deep in conversation with Ambrose Harrington near the fireplace. "Oh, Lady Eleanor, it was nothing so dramatic. We met at a charity ball in London, and, well, one thing led to another." Eleanor's smile did not quite reach her eyes. How charming! Though I do hope you're prepared for the responsibilities that come with marrying into this family. Winterbourne is a demanding mistress. Beatrice Armitage murmured something soothing, but Poirot caught the slight tightening of Clarissa's fingers around her glass. Near the Christmas tree, an enormous Norwegian pine decorated with glass baubles and real candles, Miss Daphne Rowe stood alone for a moment, observing the room with cool detachment. She was strikingly beautiful, Poirot noted, but there was a watchfulness about her that suggested she missed nothing. When Victor Langford beckoned her over with a small gesture, she moved to his side immediately, notebook in hand despite the late hour. "Miss Rowe," Langford said loudly enough for Sir Reginald to hear, Remind me tomorrow to discuss those figures from the Far East trade routes with Sir Reginald. Fascinating potential there." Sir Reginald beamed. "Indeed, Victor. We'll have a proper talk in the morning. Tonight is for celebration." Ambrose Harrington, leaning against the mantelpiece, gave a soft, cynical laugh. "Celebration," he repeated, swirling the remains of his mulled wine. "How very quaint. Tell me, uncle, are we celebrating the continued health of your empire, or the fact that you've finally decided to name an heir?" The group near the fire fell silent for a fraction of a second. Marcus Trevelyan shot Ambrose a warning glance, but Sir Reginald merely raised an eyebrow. "My dear boy," he replied evenly, "you know perfectly well that my will is my own affair, though I'm touched by your interest." Ambrose shrugged, a lazy smile playing on his lips. One likes to know where one stands, especially when one has expenses. Poirot, watching from across the room, noted the flash of irritation in Sir Reginald's eyes, quickly masked. Interesting, he thought. The nephew is in need of money, and the uncle is not inclined to be generous. At that moment, Mrs. Bellamy appeared at the entrance to the hall, her face pale. "Sir Reginald," she said, her voice low but urgent, "might I have a word in private?" Sir Reginald excused himself and followed her into the corridor. Poirot, ever curious, drifted closer to the door, pretending to admire a nearby portrait of a stern Hargrove ancestor. Through the half-open door, he caught fragments of the conversation. "Letter arrived this evening, sir. Delivered by hand, no postage. The boy who brought it wouldn't give his name." "And you're certain it's—" "Yes, sir. The same handwriting as the others. I thought you should see it at once." There was a rustle of paper. Then Sir Reginald's voice, tight with anger. "The impudence! On Christmas Eve, no less. Tell no one, Mrs. Bellamy. Burn the others if you must, but keep this one. I'll deal with it tomorrow." Poirot stepped back as Sir Reginald returned to the hall, his jovial mask firmly in place once more. But the detective had seen the brief flicker of unease in his host's eyes. The evening continued. Servants circulated with trays of mince pies and brandy butter. The quartet played "God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen," and several guests joined in singing. Clarissa's clear soprano rose above the others, earning admiring glances. Even Ambrose seemed to relax charming Beatrice Armitage with tales of Monte Carlo. Yet Poirot continued to observe. He noticed how Daphne Rose's gaze lingered on Marcus Trevelyan when she thought no one was watching. How Clarissa's laughter became just a touch too bright whenever Daphne passed nearby. How Dr. Armitage frequently checked his pocket watch, as though expecting something or someone. And he noticed something else. Sir Reginald, after returning from his conversation with Mrs. Bellamy, had taken a fresh glass of mulled wine from a passing tray. He drank deeply. Perhaps to steady his nerves, Poirot watched as the colour rose in his cheeks, attributing it to the warmth of the fire and the alcohol. At 12:30, the party began to break up. Guests drifted toward the staircase, wishing each other good night. Lady Eleanor declared herself exhausted and retired first. Ambrose followed soon after, yawning theatrically. One by one, the others dispersed, Clarissa and Marcus lingering for a stolen moment beneath the mistletoe before parting. Poirot lingered longest, conversing politely with Dr. Armitage about the challenges of rural medical practice. When the doctor finally excused himself, Poirot found himself alone with Sir Reginald by the dying fire. "A splendid evening, mon ami," Poirot said warmly. "Your hospitality is everything I imagined." Sir Reginald smiled, though Poirot thought it looked a little strained. "I'm glad you could join us, Poirot, though I confess I hadn't expected— Well, never mind. You'll stay for Christmas Day, of course. But naturally, it would be a crime to miss an English Christmas." Sir Reginald chuckled, then suddenly pressed a hand to his forehead. "Forgive me, feeling a touch light-headed. Too much of that excellent mulled wine, perhaps." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "You are unwell." No, just tired. Long day." Sir Reginald straightened with visible effort. "Good night, Poirot. Sleep well." He made his way toward the staircase, moving slowly. Poirot watched him go, a faint uneasiness stirring in his mind. Upstairs, the house settled into quiet. Fires were banked, lights extinguished. Snow continued to fall outside, muffling all sound. In his guest room, a comfortable chamber with a four-poster bed and a view of the frozen lake, Poirot prepared for bed methodically. He unwound his moustache nets, brushed his hair, and donned his silk pyjamas. Yet sleep did not come quickly. Something about the evening troubled him. The letter delivered to Sir Reginald, the tensions between family members, the subtle undercurrents of jealousy and greed, and something else, something he could not yet name. At 2 o'clock in the morning, a scream shattered the silence of Winterbourne Manor. It came from the direction of Sir Reginald's bedroom. Poirot was out of bed in an instant, pulling on his dressing gown and slippers. He hurried into the corridor, where doors were opening and confused, frightened faces appeared. Lady Eleanor emerged first, her hair in curl-papers. What on earth? Marcus Trevelyan, bare-chested and in trousers, came running from his room. Uncle Reggie's room. That was Mrs. Bellamy. They converged on Sir Reginald's door, which stood ajar. Inside, the faithful housekeeper knelt beside the bed, her face ashen. Sir Reginald Hargrove lay motionless against his pillows, his face contorted in a dreadful rictus of pain. His eyes stared sightlessly at the canopy above. On the bedside table stood an empty glass, the same crystal goblet he had carried upstairs from the hall. The scent of spiced wine still lingered in the air, but Sir Reginald Hargrove would never drink mulled wine again. Chapter 3. The mulled wine's deadly cheer. The scream still echoed in the corridors of Winterbourne Manor as the household converged on Sir Reginald Hargrove's bedroom. Snow tapped insistently against the leaded windows, and the cold seemed to seep through the very walls now that shock had replaced the earlier warmth. Hercule Poirot arrived first among the guests, his silk dressing gown tied neatly, his feet in leather slippers. He moved with calm precision, parting the small crowd that had gathered in the doorway. Mrs. Bellamy knelt beside the bed, her apron pressed to her face, rocking slightly in distress. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, taking in the scene at a glance. Sir Reginald lay half-propped against the pillows, his body rigid, his face twisted in an expression of terrible agony. His right hand clutched the counterpane, fingers curled like claws. His eyes were wide open, the pupils unnaturally dilated. A faint bluish tinge coloured his lips. On the mahogany bedside table stood the crystal goblet, empty now, but bearing the unmistakable dark residue of mulled wine at the bottom. The spicy scent still hung in the air, cloying and incongruous against the horror before them. Dr. Felix Armitage pushed through next, still fastening his dressing-gown cord. His medical bag, ever ready, had been snatched from his room. He knelt opposite Mrs. Bellamy and felt for a pulse at the throat, then the wrist. After a long moment, he looked up, his face grave. "He's gone," he said quietly. "Dead for perhaps 20 minutes, possibly less." A collective gasp rose from the doorway. Clarissa Wainwright gave a small, strangled cry and turned into Marcus Trevelyan's chest. Marcus held her tightly, his own face pale beneath his tan. Lady Eleanor stood ramrod straight, her curl papers giving her a faintly absurd appearance. "Poison," she said flatly. "That is what you're thinking, isn't it, Doctor?" Armitage hesitated. "It certainly looks like it. The facial contortion, the cyanosis, I have seen strychnine produce such symptoms, but I cannot be certain without tests." "Strychnine," Ambrose Harrington repeated from the back of the group, his voice hoarse from sleep. "Good God!" Victor Langford, fully dressed as though he had not yet retired, stepped forward. "We must telephone the police at once, and the local doctor for confirmation." "There is a storm," Mrs. Bellamy managed to say through her tears. "The telephone lines may be down. The snow is heavy." Poirot raised a hand for silence. "One moment, if you please. Dr. Armitage, you are certain of the time of death?" Armitage nodded. "Between 1:45 and 2:15, I would estimate. Rigour has not yet begun." Poirot turned to Mrs. Bellamy. "Madame, you discovered the body. Tell us precisely what occurred." The housekeeper drew a shuddering breath. I always bring Sir Reginald his hot milk at 2:00. He liked it to help him sleep. When I knocked, there was no answer. I knocked again, then entered. He was just as you see him. The glass was already empty on the table. I touched his hand. It was still warm, and then I screamed." Poirot's gaze flicked to the glass. "This glass? He brought it upstairs himself after the toast?" "Yes, sir. I saw him carry it from the great hall. He often took a final sip before bed. And no one entered this room after he retired." Mrs. Bellamy shook her head. "Not to my knowledge. The corridor was quiet." Poirot moved closer to the bedside table. He did not touch the glass but leaned in, his sharp eyes examining it. The rim was clean, no trace of lipstick or fingerprints visible to the naked eye. The faint residue inside gleamed wetly. "Interesting," he murmured. "The wine was consumed here in the bedroom. Yet the symptoms of strychnine are rapid. Convulsions, difficulty breathing. One would expect noise, a cry for help." Dr. Armitage frowned. "That is true. Strychnine victims rarely die quietly. There should have been violent spasms." "Yet no one heard anything," Poirot observed. "The walls of this old house are thick, perhaps, but not that thick." Marcus Trevelyan spoke up. "Uncle Reggie's room is at the far end of the east wing. Most of us are in the west. And with the storm—" Clarissa lifted her head. "But I thought I heard something, a sort of thud, around 2:00. I was awake, listening to the wind. I thought it was a branch against the window." Poirot turned to her. "A thud, mademoiselle. Nothing more." She shook her head, eyes wide. Lady Eleanor's voice cut through. "This is all very well, but we are standing about like fools, while a murderer may still be in the house. We must search the rooms, and someone must try the telephone." Victor Langford nodded decisively. "I'll go down to the study and attempt to ring the constable at the village. If the lines are down, we shall have to wait until morning. The snow is too deep for anyone to reach us tonight." He strode off, Miss Daphne Rowe silently falling into step behind him, as though it were the most natural thing for a secretary to accompany her employer at 3 a.m. Poirot addressed the remaining group. "Mesdames et messieurs, it is imperative that nothing in this room be touched. Dr. Armitage, you will remain here with Mrs. Bellamy to ensure the scene is preserved. Captain Trevelyan, perhaps you would assist Mr. Langford with the telephone and check that all doors and windows are secure." Marcus nodded and left, Clarissa clinging to his arm. Ambrose Harrington lingered in the doorway, staring at his uncle's body with an expression difficult to read. Shock, perhaps, mingled with something colder. "You will inherit now, I suppose?" Lady Eleanor said to him suddenly, her tone icy. Ambrose met her gaze. "That remains to be seen, Aunt. Uncle Reggie was fond of changing his will." "Enough," Poirot said firmly. "Accusations at this moment serve no one. Return to your rooms, please. I will examine the corridor and the staircase." Reluctantly, the guests dispersed. Lady Eleanor paused beside Poirot. "You will take charge of this, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked quietly. "The local police are competent for cattle theft, but murder—" Poirot inclined his head. "I am here, madame, and Hercule Poirot does not abandon a problem once it presents itself." She gave a tight nod and swept away. Left alone, save for Dr. Armitage and the silent form on the bed, Poirot began his examination. He studied the carpet for footprints. Nothing visible. The windows were fastened against the cold, a thin line of snow on the outer sill showing they had not been opened. The fireplace held only grey ashes. He returned to the goblet. Using a clean handkerchief, he lifted it carefully and sniffed. The spice was strong, but beneath it, something bitter, metallic. He set it down exactly as he had found it. Dr. Armitage watched him. "You suspect the mulled wine was poisoned during the toast?" "Possibly," Poirot replied. "Yet every guest drank from identical goblets. No one else is ill." "Unless only one glass was tainted." "Precisely. And Sir Reginald's glass was placed slightly apart on the tray. I noticed it at the time, a small thing. But significant?" Armitage rubbed his chin. "Strychnine is tasteless in small doses, but in a lethal amount it is intensely bitter. The spices and sugar in mulled wine might mask it." "Might," Poirot echoed. "We shall see." He moved to the door and examined the lock and handle. No scratches, no signs of forced entry. Then he stepped into the corridor. The gas lamps had been turned low, casting long shadows along the panelled walls. Portraits of Hargrove ancestors gazed down impassively. Poirot walked slowly toward the main staircase, noting every door, every alcove. Halfway along, he paused. On the deep pile carpet, almost invisible, was a single dark droplet. He crouched, touching it lightly with a fingertip. Still wet. Wine or something else? He followed the direction it suggested. 3 more droplets led toward the servants' stair at the end of the corridor. A narrow flight used by the staff to reach the upper floors without disturbing guests. Poirot descended cautiously. The stair opened into a small landing near the kitchens. Here the air was warmer, scented with dying fires and yesterday's roasting. A door to the outside yard stood bolted from within, a light dusting of snow beneath it, showing it had not been opened. On the flagstone floor, however, he found what he sought, a 5th droplet, larger, and beside it the faint outline of a shoe print, small, narrow, a woman's perhaps. Poirot straightened, his moustache twitching with satisfaction. Someone had come this way after the toast, carrying a glass or a vial. Someone who knew the house well enough to use the servants' stair. He returned upstairs deep in thought. By the time he reached the great hall again, Victor Langford was waiting with grim news. "The telephone lines are down," he announced to the small group that had gathered by the fire. "We are completely cut off. No help until the snow clears, perhaps not until late tomorrow." Clarissa gave a small sob. Marcus put an arm around her. "Then we are trapped here," Lady Eleanor said, "with a murderer." Poirot surveyed them all, pale faces, frightened eyes, hands clasped tightly around brandy glasses that someone had thoughtfully provided. "Trapped, yes," he said softly, "but the murderer is also trapped, and Hercule Poirot is trapped with him." Outside, the snow continued to fall, thick and silent, erasing all traces of the world beyond Winterbourne Manor. Inside, the festive cheer of Christmas Eve had turned to dread, and the poisoned glass stood sentinel on the bedside table, waiting for the truth to be uncovered. Chapter 4. Poirot's snowbound arrival. Dawn crept slowly over Winterbourne Manor, a pale, watery light filtering through heavy grey clouds. The snow had stopped some time before sunrise, leaving the estate buried beneath a thick white blanket that muffled every sound. No cart tracks marred the drive. No footprints led to or from the great oak doors. The world beyond the manor might as well have ceased to exist. Hercule Poirot stood at the window of the breakfast room, gazing out at the frozen landscape. He had risen early, as was his habit, and performed his morning toilette with meticulous care. The moustache waxed, the hair parted with precision, the suit pressed despite the circumstances. Order, he believed, was the antidote to chaos, even when murder had struck in the night. The breakfast table had been laid as usual. Silver chafing dishes on the sideboard, toast racks, marmalade, a pot of strong coffee. But only Poirot and Dr. Felix Armitage were present. The others, it seemed, had no appetite for food after the horrors of the early hours. Armitage buttered a piece of toast mechanically. "I telephoned the village surgery as soon as the lines came back, about an hour ago. The local doctor and the constable should arrive by midday, weather permitting. They'll bring a mortuary van." Poirot nodded, pouring himself a second cup of coffee. "And the body? Still in situ. I sealed the room myself. Mrs. Bellamy is keeping watch outside the door. She refuses to leave her master. Even now." Poirot's eyes gleamed. A loyal soul. Loyalty is rare and often revealing. He sipped his coffee, then set the cup down with delicate precision. "Tell me, doctor, you are the family physician. You knew Sir Reginald well. Did he have enemies?" Armitage hesitated. Reginald was a forceful man. In business, he could be ruthless. Shipping is a cutthroat world. But enemies who would resort to murder? I find that hard to believe. "Yet someone did resort to murder," Poirot observed gently. "And with considerable cunning. The poison administered in a glass of festive wine, during a toast in which everyone drank, a bold stroke." Armitage frowned. "I've been thinking about that. Strychnine acts quickly, within minutes, if the dose is large enough. If the poison was added to the mulled wine in the Great Hall, Sir Reginald should have collapsed there, in front of us all." "Exactly so," Poirot agreed. Yet he retired calmly, walked upstairs unaided, and died quietly in his bed. Therefore, the poison was administered after the toast, most likely in the bedroom itself. But how? Mrs. Bellamy saw no one enter. Poirot permitted himself a small smile. No one, she noticed, but someone came nevertheless. "I found traces in the corridor, droplets leading to the servants' stair. Someone familiar with the house." Before Armitage could reply, the door opened and Victor Langford entered, followed closely by Miss Daphne Rowe. Langford looked as though he had not slept. His tie was slightly askew, his eyes red-rimmed. Miss Rowe, by contrast, appeared immaculate, her notebook already in hand. "Lines are working again," Langford announced. "Police will be here as soon as the roads are cleared. In the meantime, I suggest we all remain in the public rooms. No one should be alone." A sensible precaution, Poirot thought, though perhaps a little late. One by one, the remaining guests drifted in. Lady Eleanor arrived wrapped in a black shawl, her face pale but composed. Ambrose Harrington followed, unshaven and sullen, pouring himself coffee with a shaking hand. Marcus Trevelyan and Clarissa came together, her eyes swollen from crying. Beatrice Armitage brought up the rear, silent and watchful as always. No one spoke of the murder directly. Conversation hovered around the weather, the depth of the snow, the likelihood of the police arriving before nightfall. Beneath the polite words, tension crackled like ice on a pond. Poirot observed them all, his small grey cells busy. He noted how Ambrose avoided his aunt's gaze, how Clarissa kept close to Marcus, yet glanced frequently at Daphne Rowe, how Langford spoke to Sir Reginald's butler about business papers in the study, as though the master of the house were merely away on a trip. After breakfast, Poirot requested permission to examine Sir Reginald's bedroom again. Dr. Armitage accompanied him, and together they entered the sealed chamber. The body had not been moved. Sir Reginald lay exactly as before, the rictus of agony frozen on his face. Poirot moved about the room with quiet efficiency, examining every surface, every object. He opened the wardrobe, rows of tailored suits, shoes polished to a mirror shine. The dressing table held silver-backed brushes, a bottle of eau de cologne, cufflinks arranged in neat rows, nothing out of place. Then he turned to the bedside table again. The empty goblet stood where he had left it. Beside it, almost hidden by the fold of the counterpane, lay a small folded square of paper. Poirot picked it up carefully with tweezers from his pocket kit. It was a note, written in block capitals. "You have been warned. This is the last." Armitage read it over his shoulder and whistled softly. "Blackmail?" "Evidently," Poirot replied. "Mrs. Bellamy mentioned letters delivered anonymously. This would appear to be the latest." He slipped the note into an envelope. "We must discover what Sir Reginald was being threatened over. A secret from the past, perhaps. Something worth killing to keep hidden." They left the room, and Poirot sealed the door once more with tape. In the corridor, he paused, looking toward the servant's stair. "I wish to speak with the staff," he announced. "All of them, together." Half an hour later, the servants were assembled in the kitchen. Mrs. Bellamy, the butler, Mr. Graves, cook, 3 housemaids, 2 footmen, and the boot boy. They stood in a nervous semicircle, while Poirot addressed them from the head of the long deal table. "You will have heard of the tragedy," he began. "Sir Reginald was poisoned. The police will come, but until then I, Hercule Poirot, will investigate. I require your complete honesty." He questioned them methodically. Who had prepared the mulled wine? Cook, assisted by the kitchen maid. Who had carried the trays to the great hall? The 2 footmen. Had anyone lingered near Sir Reginald's glass? No one admitted to it. Then he asked about the anonymous letters. Mrs. Bellamy spoke up. "There were 3 before this one, sir, delivered by hand over the past month. Sir Reginald told me to burn them, but I kept them in my room. I thought they might be important one day." Poirot's eyes lit. "You have them still?" She nodded and fetched them from her quarters. The messages were similar, brief, threatening, demanding money to keep a secret buried. No signature, no specific details. Poirot studied the handwriting. Block capitals, carefully formed, betraying nothing of the writer's personality. "Interesting," he murmured. "The murderer grows impatient, and then strikes." He dismissed the servants with thanks, then returned to the drawing-room, where the guests had gathered around a roaring fire. "Mesdames et messieurs," he announced, "until the police arrive, I propose we remain together. No one is to leave this room without informing another. We are, after all, snowbound with a poisoner." Lady Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "You believe the murderer is one of us, Monsieur Poirot?" "I believe," he replied carefully, "that the murderer is someone who knew Sir Reginald's habits intimately, someone who could move about this house unseen, someone who had access to poison and motive." Ambrose gave a bitter laugh. "Well, that narrows it down to everyone here, doesn't it? We all had access, and most of us had motive. Uncle Reggie wasn't exactly beloved." "Ambrose," Lady Eleanor snapped. "It's true, Aunt. He held the purse strings tight, threatened to cut me off more than once. Marcus here was his favourite. He'd have inherited everything eventually. And Mr. Langford was desperate for that investment. Who knows what secrets the old man held over the rest of us?" Marcus flushed angrily. "That's enough," said Ambrose. "Have some respect." "Respect?" Ambrose sneered. "For a man who treated us all like pawns?" Poirot raised a hand. "Silence, please. Accusations without evidence are worthless. We must wait for facts." He settled into an armchair by the fire, his eyes half closed, apparently dozing. But his mind was racing. The poison, where had it come from? Strychnine was not common, but not impossible to obtain. A doctor might have access, or someone with rats in an old house. The method, how had the poison reached only Sir Reginald's glass? The toast had been public, the bedroom private, and the letters, who had written them? The murderer to create confusion, or a separate blackmailer whose threats had driven someone to kill? Outside, the sun climbed higher, glinting off the snow. Footprints now marred the drive, two sets approaching from the gate. The police, at last. Poirot opened his eyes as the doorbell rang. "The authorities arrive," he said softly, "but Hercule Poirot has already begun." The snowbound isolation was ending, but the puzzle of the poisoned glass was only just beginning to reveal its deadly shape. Chapter 5. Interrogations by the fireside. The drawing-room at Winterbourne Manor had become an impromptu tribunal. A huge fire roared in the grate, throwing restless light across the Persian rugs, and the anxious faces gathered around it. Outside, the snow-ploughed lane had finally allowed two vehicles to reach the manor. The local constable's Morris and the doctor's Austin. Formalities were underway upstairs. Photographs taken, the body removed for post-mortem. But everyone knew the real investigation now rested with the small Belgian in the perfectly cut suit. Hercule Poirot stood with his back to the fire, hands clasped behind him, his green eyes moving methodically from one guest to another. Inspector Rawlins, a solid Wiltshire man with a weathered face and a notebook, sat to one side, content for the moment to let the famous detective conduct proceedings. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice precise and calm, "we are all aware of the tragedy that has occurred. Sir Reginald Hargrove has been poisoned, almost certainly with strychnine, sometime between retiring to his room and 2 o'clock this morning. The means appears to have been the mulled wine in the crystal goblet he carried upstairs. My task, and yours, Inspector, is to discover who administered that poison and why." He paused, letting the silence settle. "I shall ask each of you in turn to account for your movements after the toast last night. I shall also ask certain questions that may seem impertinent, but truth, you understand, is often concealed in the small details. We begin." He turned first to Lady Eleanor Hargrove, who sat bolt upright in a high-backed chair, her black shawl drawn tightly around her shoulders. Lady Eleanor, you retired early, I believe. At approximately 12:30, she replied coolly. I suffer from migraines. The excitement of the evening had brought one on. I took a powder and went straight to my room, the blue suite at the opposite end of the west wing from my brother's. Did you see or hear anyone after that? No one. My maid helped me undress and left. I read for perhaps 10 minutes, then slept. Poirot nodded. And your relationship with your brother? Forgive me, was it close? Lady Eleanor's lips thinned. We were not intimate, if that is what you mean. Reginald was 15 years my senior. After our parents died, he became head of the family. He was authoritarian. We disagreed on many things, particularly his treatment of Ambrose. Ambrose? My nephew. Reginald threatened repeatedly to disinherit him. I felt it unjust. Ambrose is the direct male heir. Thank you, madame. Poirot turned to Ambrose Harrington, who lounged in an armchair with studied nonchalance, though his fingers drummed restlessly on the arm. Monsieur Harrington, you suggested last night that Sir Reginald held the purse strings tightly. Tell me more. Ambrose gave a short, humourless laugh. He held them in a death grip. I have had an allowance. Generous by some standards, but never enough for my commitments. Debts, Monsieur Poirot. Cards, horses, the usual vices. 3 months ago, he gave me an ultimatum. Reform or be cut off entirely. I believe he had already changed his will in favour of Marcus. Marcus Trevelyan stiffened. That's conjecture, Ambrose. Is it? Ambrose shot back. You were always the golden boy, Marcus. War hero, steady character. Of course, he'd leave everything to you. Poirot raised a hand. Your movements after retiring, monsieur? I went to my room. Green room, east wing, next to Uncle's. Had a nightcap from the flask I keep there. Read a racing paper, went to sleep, heard nothing until the scream. You are certain you did not leave your room? Ambrose met his gaze steadily. Quite certain. Poirot's eyes lingered a moment, then moved on. Captain Trevelyan, you are Sir Reginald's godson, and, I understand, much favoured. Marcus inclined his head. He was like a father to me after my own died. I spent every school holiday here. And the inheritance? I never thought about it, Marcus said firmly. Uncle Reggie was healthy. There was time. Clarissa, seated beside him, squeezed his hand. Poirot turned to her. Miss Wainwright, you are newly engaged to Captain Trevelyan. Did Sir Reginald approve? Clarissa coloured. He welcomed me warmly, though he did say, in private, that he hoped Marcus would not rush into anything. Lady Eleanor gave a soft snort. Poirot continued gently. And last night, after you parted from Captain Trevelyan beneath the mistletoe, I went to my room, the Rose Suite. I was restless. I heard the clock strike 1, then 2. I thought I heard a thud, as I told you earlier, but nothing more. Poirot nodded and turned to Victor Langford, who sat forward, hands clasped between his knees. Monsieur Langford, you sought investment from Sir Reginald for a shipping venture, yes? Langford nodded. A substantial sum. We were close to agreement. His death complicates matters severely. Complicates or relieves? Poirot asked softly. Langford flushed. I don't follow. If Sir Reginald had refused the investment, your position would have been difficult. It would have been inconvenient, Langford admitted stiffly. But murder? Absurd. And Miss Rowe? Poirot turned to the secretary, who had remained silent until now. I retired when Mr. Langford did, about 1 o'clock. My room is adjacent to his in the guest wing. I heard nothing unusual. Poirot studied her serene face. You are very observant, mademoiselle. Did you notice anything during the evening that struck you as odd? For the first time, Daphne hesitated. Only Sir Reginald seemed preoccupied after speaking with Mrs. Bellamy. He drank rather more of the mulled wine than usual. Interesting, Poirot murmured. Finally, he addressed Dr. and Mrs. Armitage. Doctor, you refused the mulled wine last night, citing a sensitive stomach. Yet you are familiar with poisons in your profession. Armitage met his gaze steadily. I have strychnine in my bag, for vermin control on farms, but it is locked and accounted for. May we examine it? Certainly, though I checked this morning, nothing is missing. And you, madam? Poirot asked Beatrice Armitage, who had spoken barely a word. She looked up, startled. I retired early with my husband. I sleep heavily. I heard nothing. Poirot thanked them all and dismissed the group with a small bow. Inspector Rawlins closed his notebook. Well, Mr. Poirot, any thoughts? Many, Poirot replied. But they are still forming. The alibis are fragile. Everyone claims to have been alone in their room. Yet someone walked the corridor, carrying poison. Someone knew Sir Reginald would take that glass upstairs. Someone had access to strychnine. He paced slowly. Consider the psychology. This is not a crime of passion. It is calculated. The murderer waited until the house was quiet, entered the bedroom, or persuaded Sir Reginald to drink without raising alarm. That suggests familiarity. Trust, Rawlins nodded. Family, then? Or someone very close to the family? Upstairs, the local doctor emerged from Sir Reginald's room with the constable. Preliminary findings. Death by strychnine poisoning, ingested approximately 1 hour before death. No sign of struggle. The goblet had been sent for analysis. Poirot rejoined the guests in the drawing room. Lunch had been served, a cold collation no one touched, and the afternoon light was already fading. He stood once more before the fire. One more matter, he said quietly. The anonymous letters. Mrs. Bellamy has shown them to me. They demanded money to keep silent about a matter from 30 years ago. Does anyone know what that matter might be? Silence. Lady Eleanor spoke at last. There was an incident in 1895. A shipping clerk embezzled funds. Reginald covered it up to avoid scandal. The man, Harrington, a cousin, was sent to Australia. Disgrace, Ambrose started. My grandfather? Lady Eleanor nodded. Reginald felt responsible. He paid restitution quietly, but if it became public now, with his knighthood, blackmail, Poirot finished, and perhaps a motive for murder, if Sir Reginald refused to pay further. Ambrose laughed bitterly. So the old scandal kills him after all. Poirot's eyes gleamed, or provides convenient cover for a more modern motive. He glanced at the clock. 4 o'clock. Outside, snow began to fall again. Tonight, he said, we remain vigilant. The house is locked. The murderer is still among us. But Hercule Poirot is closer to the truth than he or she realizes. The fire crackled. No one spoke. In the silence, the weight of suspicion settled heavier than the snow outside. Chapter 6. Shadows of the Past. Unearthed. The afternoon light had faded to a cold twilight when Hercule Poirot summoned everyone back to the drawing-room. Fresh logs had been piled on the fire, but the warmth could not dispel the chill that had settled over the house. Inspector Rawlins stood by the door, notebook in hand, while the guests arranged themselves in a loose semicircle, some on sofas, some in armchairs, all with the wary expressions of people who knew they were being watched. Poirot remained standing, his small figure immaculate despite the long day. He placed a small stack of papers on the occasional table beside him. the 4 anonymous letters Mrs. Bellamy had preserved. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "we have established the how of this crime. Sir Reginald was poisoned by strychnine introduced into the mulled wine he carried to his bedroom. The dose was large. Death occurred within the hour, quietly, because he was alone. What we now require is the why, and for that we must look into the past." He held up the letters. "These arrived over the last 6 weeks. They demand money, £5,000, to prevent the revelation of a scandal from 30 years ago. Lady Eleanor has told us of the embezzlement by a cousin, Mr. Harrington, who was quietly banished to Australia. Sir Reginald paid the deficit to avoid public disgrace." Ambrose Harrington shifted uncomfortably. "My grandfather," he said bitterly, "the family skeleton. Uncle Reggie never let me forget I carried that blood." "Yet," Poirot continued, "the letters contain no specific details of the crime, only vague threats. This suggests the writer knew of the scandal, but perhaps not the full truth. Or," he paused dramatically, "they were invented entirely to create fear." Dr. Armitage frowned. "You believe the blackmail was a blind?" "I believe it was convenient," Poirot replied. "Convenient for someone who wished Sir Reginald dead for quite different reasons. The letters provided a motive that pointed away from the true one." He turned to Victor Langford. "Monsieur, you told me the shipping investment was close to agreement. Yet I have examined Sir Reginald's desk, with Inspector Rawlins's permission. There is a letter, drafted but not sent, refusing your request. He writes that your company's accounts show irregularities he cannot ignore." Langford's face flushed dark red. "That's outrageous! Poirot raised a hand. "The letter is dated yesterday. Perhaps he intended to discuss it with you this morning. £500,000 is a large sum to lose." Miss Daphne Rowe laid a restraining hand on her employer's arm, but Langford shook it off. "I didn't kill him," he snapped. "I needed him alive to sign the papers." "Perhaps," Poirot said mildly. "Or perhaps you feared exposure more than the loss of funds." He moved on before Langford could protest further. "Captain Trevelyan, you were the favoured godson. Yet Sir Reginald confided to Dr. Armitage only last month that he had concerns about your engagement." Marcus stiffened. "Concerns?" "He feared Miss Wainwright's father sought the match for financial advantage. He intended to withhold his blessing and the settlement he had promised until he was satisfied." Clarissa gasped. "That's not true." "My father," Marcus laid a hand on her knee. "It's all right, darling. Uncle Reggie and I argued about it last week. He thought I was rushing, but murder? Never." Poirot's gaze softened slightly. "I believe you, mon capitaine. Passion does not hide so cleverly." He turned to Ambrose. "And you, monsieur, stood to inherit if Sir Reginald died before changing his will again. Mrs. Bellamy tells me he summoned his solicitor for Boxing Day to revise the document in light of your latest debts." Ambrose paled. "He was always threatening that. I never took it seriously." "Yet this time he was serious. The solicitor confirmed it by telephone this afternoon." Silence fell, heavy and accusing. Lady Eleanor spoke at last. "So we all had motives, Monsieur Poirot. Greed, fear, anger. But who had the means? Who could obtain strychnine and enter my brother's room unseen?" Poirot smiled, a small, satisfied movement of the moustache. "That is where the shadows of the past truly help us. For the poison was not introduced in the bedroom at all." A murmur rippled through the room. "Impossible," Dr. Armitage said. The timing is everything," Poirot interrupted. "Strychnine acts swiftly, yes, but not always. In small doses, it can be cumulative. Sir Reginald had been unwell for weeks. Headaches, stiffness, occasional cramps. Symptoms he dismissed as age. But Dr. Armitage, you prescribed him a tonic, did you not? For his nerves. Armitage nodded slowly. A standard preparation, iron, quinine, a trace of strychnine as stimulant, perfectly safe in tiny amounts. Exactly, and that tonic was kept on his bedside table. Refilled every fortnight by Mrs. Bellamy from the bottle in the medicine cabinet. Mrs. Bellamy, summoned to the doorway, nodded tearfully. Yes, sir, I filled it yesterday morning. Poirot held up a small brown bottle. This bottle, seized this afternoon from the cabinet. Analysis will confirm, but I am certain it now contains a lethal concentration of strychnine. Someone replaced the harmless tonic with poison over the past weeks. Each evening Sir Reginald took his spoonful. Last night, after the excitement of the party, he would have taken a double dose to help him sleep, the final fatal amount. The room erupted in shocked exclamations. But the mulled wine, Clarissa began. Was harmless, Poirot finished. The residue in the glass was merely spice. The murderer wished us to believe the poison was administered publicly, during the toast, to create confusion and multiple suspects. But the true method was slow, patient, intimate. Only someone who lived in this house, or visited regularly, could tamper with the tonic undetected. All eyes turned instinctively toward the family members. Poirot shook his head. Not the family. They were watched too closely by servants, by each other. No, the person who moved freely through the private rooms, who knew Sir Reginald's habits perfectly, who had access to medicines. He turned to Beatrice Armitage. Madame, you have been very quiet throughout. Yet you are the one person who could enter the bedroom at any time without suspicion. As the doctor's wife, you often helped Mrs. Bellamy with small nursing tasks when Sir Reginald felt unwell. You refilled the tonic bottle yourself on several occasions, did you not? Beatrice Armitage went very still. Her mild, mousy face seemed to sharpen. That proves nothing, she said, her voice steady. No, Poirot agreed, but this does. He produced a small envelope from his pocket and tipped out a single dark hair. This was caught in the cork of the poisoned bottle. A woman's hair, dyed, but showing grey at the root. Like yours, madame. And in your room we found a packet of strychnine powder, taken from your husband's bag while he slept. Enough missing to account for the lethal dose. Dr. Armitage stared at his wife in horror. Beatrice, why? She laughed then. A sudden, bitter sound. Because he destroyed my family, she said. 30 years ago, the embezzler wasn't Harrington. It was my father, Edward Langley, the clerk. Reginald Hargrove framed him to cover his own losses. My father was transported in disgrace. He died in Australia, broken. I married Felix to get close to this house, to wait for my chance. The letters were mine, to make him suffer fear before he died. Lady Eleanor gasped. But you've been our friend for 20 years. 20 years of smiling while I planned, Beatrice said. Her composure cracked at last. He recognized me last month. Saw the resemblance. He was going to tell Felix everything. I had to act. Inspector Rawlins stepped forward. Beatrice Armitage, I am arresting you for the murder of Sir Reginald Hargrove. She did not resist as the handcuffs clicked. Dr. Armitage sat, as though turned to stone, unable to look at her. Poirot watched calmly as she was led away. The past, he said softly, casts long shadows, but eventually the light of truth reveals them. The fire settled in the grate with a soft collapse of embers. Outside the snow had stopped, and a pale moon rose over the quiet manor. Christmas Day dawned cold and clear, but Winterbourne would never celebrate quite the same way again. Chapter 7. The Poison's Cunning Trail. The drawing-room fell into stunned silence as Beatrice Armitage was led away by Inspector Rawlins. Dr. Felix Armitage sat motionless, his face ashen, staring at the fire as though it could burn away the revelation of his wife's guilt. Outside, the moon silvered the snow-covered lawns, casting long shadows through the tall windows. Hercule Poirot remained standing, his expression grave but satisfied. He had laid out the solution with his customary precision, and yet something nagged at the edges of his mind. A small discrepancy, a loose thread that refused to be neatly tied. He cleared his throat softly. "Mesdames et messieurs, I must apologize." Every head turned towards him in surprise. "Apologize," Lady Eleanor repeated sharply, "for solving my brother's murder?" Poirot inclined his head. "For presenting only half the truth. Madame Armitage's confession was dramatic, convenient even, but Hercule Poirot is not satisfied with convenience. There are details that do not fit." Dr. Armitage looked up, confusion mingling with pain. "What do you mean? She admitted everything. The hair, the strychnine packet in her room?" "Planted," Poirot said quietly, "as was the poisoned tonic bottle itself." A collective gasp rose. Inspector Rawlins paused in the doorway. "Mr. Poirot," she confessed freely. "Under pressure," Poirot replied, "and with motive supplied by her own words. But consider, if Madame Armitage truly waited 20 years for revenge, why act now? Why risk discovery by writing anonymous letters that could be traced? Why leave a hair on the cork and strychnine in her own drawer?" Marcus Trevelyan frowned. "Then who—" Poirot raised a hand. "Patience. Let us follow the poison's trail once more, with clearer eyes." He began to pace slowly before the fire. First the symptoms. Sir Reginald had been unwell for weeks. Stiffness, cramps, headaches. This suggests gradual poisoning, yes. The tonic on his bedside table was the perfect vehicle. But who refilled that tonic most often? Not Madame Armitage alone. Mrs. Bellamy did so regularly. And who had unrestricted access to Dr. Armitage's medical bag? Anyone who visited the surgery or the doctor's bedroom here at the manor. He stopped and faced the group. Second, the letters. The handwriting is disguised, block capitals, but the paper is common, available in any stationer's. The threats are vague. A true blackmailer from the past would have been specific. These letters were designed to mislead. Victor Langford stirred. "You're saying Beatrice was framed?" "I am saying," Poirot corrected, "that someone wished us to believe the murder rooted in ancient scandal. Someone who knew the family history well enough to invent the story of the wronged clerk's daughter." All eyes turned instinctively toward Dr. Armitage, but Poirot shook his head. "No, Doctor, you are devastated. Your shock is genuine, but there is one among us who has listened quietly, observed everything, and moved through this house like a shadow." He turned slowly to Miss Daphne Rowe. "Mademoiselle." Daphne did not flinch. Her green eyes met his steadily. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot. You are Mr. Langford's secretary. Efficient, discreet, indispensable. You take notes, you anticipate his needs. But you also anticipate others. You poured coffee this morning. You fetched shawls for the ladies. You were in and out of every room. Never noticed, because you make yourself useful." Daphne's lips curved in a faint smile. "A good secretary is invisible." "Precisely," Poirot agreed, "and invisibility is perfect for murder." Langford exploded. "This is nonsense. Daphne has been with me for 3 years. She has no connection to Sir Reginald. Does she not?" Poirot produced a folded document from his pocket. This is a birth certificate, obtained by telephone from Somerset House this afternoon. Daphne Rowe, born Daphne Langley, daughter of Edward Langley, the clerk banished to Australia in 1895. You changed your name by deed poll at 21. You sought employment with Mr. Langford because you knew he was courting Sir Reginald's investment. You needed proximity. Daphne's composure cracked for the first time. Colour drained from her face. Poirot continued relentlessly. You learned the house during previous visits. You knew about the tonic. You stole strychnine from Dr. Armitage's bag during dinner, while he was conversing with Sir Reginald. You added it gradually to the tonic bottle in the medicine cabinet to which you had access when helping Mrs. Bellamy. He turned to Beatrice Armitage, who had been brought back into the room at his request. Last night, after the toast, you waited until the house was quiet. You went to Sir Reginald's room via the servant's stair, carrying not poison, but an empty goblet to leave on his table. You knew he would take his tonic before sleep. You spilled a few drops of mulled wine in the corridor to suggest urgency, but your true masterstroke was framing Madame Armitage. Beatrice stared at Daphne in horror. You used me? Daphne's voice was bitter. You married into the family that destroyed mine. You lived comfortably while my father died in poverty. When Poirot began to suspect gradual poisoning, I saw my chance. I planted the strychnine in your drawer this morning while everyone was at breakfast. I pulled a hair from your brush. I knew you would confess to protect your husband from suspicion. Dr. Armitage made a strangled sound. Poirot nodded. And the letters? I wrote them, Daphne admitted calmly, to create confusion, to make it seem like an outsider's crime. I never intended Beatrice to be arrested. I only needed time to leave with Mr. Langford after the investment was secured. But Sir Reginald's draft refusal changed everything. He had to die before he could send it. Langford stared at her as though seeing her for the first time. You used me? Daphne's eyes softened for a moment. I needed you, Victor. Your